So you want to go to an American law school?
Yes, please.
Let's cover the first question that you need to answer. Is this even possible? Will US law schools even accept you as an international student? And the answer is yes. Most definitely they will. By some estimates, anywhere from 5 to 15% of law school classes are international students. So getting in as an international student is definitely possible, but you need to keep the following things in mind if you want that big envelope in the mail. Now, for the most part, as an international applicant, your application is going to look very similar to those of your United States counterparts. That means that you need to take either the LSAT or the GRE. And by the way, make sure to register for these exams early because oftentimes the ability to take these exams in other nations is limited relative to the ability to take them in the United States. You need to draft a compelling personal statement. You need effective letters of recommendation. It helps to have good work experience. And of course, you need to submit your grades, which hopefully are good, from your university or your college that you attended in your home country. You might be wondering, well, if my grading system is different than the United States, does that affect me? How does law school weigh that? And the answer is that LSAC, which is the organization that manages the law school application process, will use their own calculator to translate your grades into something that admissions committees and councils can review. So don't worry too much about the fact that your system looks and feels different than other grading systems out there. Just get as good of grades as you can and submit your grades to LSAC early because sometimes it can take them quite a bit of time to process your grades and translate them in this way. Now, one notable difference in the application process for international law school applicants is that law schools want to make sure that you know how to speak English, at least at a basic level.
You speak English? Yes.
And that means that some law schools will require you to take exams that test your ability to speak English. For example, the Test of English as a Foreign Language, or TOEFL test, or the International English Language Testing System. You may have to submit your scores for one of these exams in order to apply to some US law schools. Now, keep in mind that trying to get into a US law school when you're international may be a bit more competitive than if you were US based. And that's because law schools probably have some internal quota of how many international students they are willing to accept into their law school class. And part of the reason there is because law schools care very deeply about the employment statistics and data for their graduating classes of law students every single year. And that's important because obviously law schools want to show future students that if you go to our school, you're going to get a job. And because ranking systems like the US News and World Report will include the employment statistic as a factor in the ranking of that school. And in the United States, where our immigration system is kind of a mess, being an international citizen and going to a US law school unfortunately doesn't guarantee that you will get a work visa to stay in the United States and practice law here. Usually, the path to staying in the US and working full-time after graduating law school is by getting an H-1B visa. But getting an H-1B visa requires your employer to sponsor you and go through all of these regulatory hoops to help you get that visa. This costs money to the employer. And because of that, there are many employers that are not willing to sponsor international folks who want to work full-time at that organization or agency. For example, small law firms, public interest, nonprofit, and many government agencies will not sponsor international folks who want to work there full-time after graduating law school. What this means for you is that if your goal is to stay in the United States after going to a US law school, you need to target working at a big law firm. And you need to make sure that you're going to a big law firm that you know in advance is willing to sponsor you for the H-1B.
You're hired.
Now, even if you do go through all these hoops and you do end up at a firm that is willing to sponsor you, unfortunately, there's still no guarantee that you're going to get the H-1B visa. In fact, one of my best buds from my old firm, Wilson Sonsini, was international, and Wilson did sponsor him for the H-1B lottery, but he didn't get the lottery of acceptance. Instead, he was one of the folks in that cycle that got rejected from the H-1B system, and unfortunately, he had to leave the country for a few years before eventually coming back later when he did get accepted on the H-1B. So I say all of this just to give you a little perspective that it's a little bit more difficult to get into law school as an international applicant because law schools know that it's harder to place international graduates at jobs, and it's also harder for you to get a job because getting a job and actually staying in the United States requires working with the United States immigration system, and that's no easy thing. Now, this doesn't mean that going to a United States law school isn't worth it for you, even if your plan is to move back to your home country or a different country that isn't the United States to practice law or to work in government or business or something else. There are plenty plenty of examples of people who come to the US and get a US law degree and then move back to their home country or a different nation, and they use the US law degree either to practice law or to do something else. And the fact is that having the US law degree helps build their resume and give them credibility. And by the way, in the United States, after you graduate law school, you also need to pass the bar exam, which certifies you to practice law in the United States. And thankfully, international folks are allowed to take the bar exam, so you don't need to worry about that piece. If your goal is to be in that 5 to 15% of students who are international and who are accepted to a US-based law school, then you should check out the $5 guide to getting into law school that I wrote with all of the tips and tricks and strategies to optimize your application for success. It is down in the caption below. Getting into a US law school as an international applicant is no small feat, and that's why you're going to need all the help you can get, and I encourage you for the price of a cup of coffee to check out the guide. If you have questions, we have a free mentorship Discord also in the caption where I answer every question in there at no cost. And if you're not subbed to the channel, I encourage you to hit that sub button. Thank you guys, best of luck, and I'll see you next time.